Unpopular horror opinions. Hello and welcome to another video. Now, I've done lots of horror reviews over the years, though it still sometimes feels like I've just kind of dipped my toe in, considering the amount of videos I've done on Doctor Who. But I want to do more because I'm doing more videos in general at the moment anyway. We'll see how long that lasts, but at the moment I'm feeling inspired to do more. And well, that includes more horror. Now, Doctor Who fans who've watched this channel will know that I often have somewhat contrary opinions to what the consensus of that fandom is. I'm not being difficult. I am a naturally contrary bastard, but it's just I just sometimes don't get it. I just don't get it. I came to my own conclusions a long time ago, and when you hear the consensus of quote unquote fans, you're sometimes like, what? And I have to say, I'm sometimes like that with horror fans. Now, again, horror fandom is a very broad church, obviously. You know, there's some people who are just solely into the slasher movies. There's some people who are into like the old 30s movies. There's some very silly people who are only into the modern ones. But nonetheless, there are kind of consensus opinions that seem to be repeated over and over again, especially like on YouTube and that. And I don't necessarily agree with all of them. So as my way of saying hello to the horror community, if they haven't already noticed me, which apparently nobody has, I present to you my top 10 unpopular horror opinions, just to make myself as popular as I am with Doctor Who fans. Number 1. Friday the 13th series is a bit Now, to be fair, I'm somewhat fonder of it now than I was, say, 10 years ago. But the absolute kind of orgasmic adulation that series often gets from in some quarters just leaves me genuinely kind of baffled, to be honest. Now, to be fair, maybe a lack of nostalgia has something to do with that, because I never saw any of the Friday the 13th as a kid. And it wasn't because I wasn't exposed to horror as a kid. I was exposed to a lot of horror as a kid. But for whatever reason, none of the Friday the 13th movies were ever any of the horror movies that my older brothers rented. So the first I kind of saw the Friday the 13th series was in like the early mid-ish 90s, when I became old enough to rent, R-rated movies on my own. That's when I first saw like Halloween 4 and 5 and Black Christmas and other stuff. I didn't even know there was a Halloween 4 and 5 at that point. And the Friday the 13th, I'd heard of them, so they were one of the kind of the go-tos that I would go and rent. And to be fair, I enjoyed them at the time, though. Again, that's kind of like when I was kind of diving into Doctor Who in the mid to late 80s. Anything new you kind of like because it's new, and then it's later on that you kind of develop more kind of a critical take on it and decide what your favourites are and what aren't necessarily your favourites. And over time, I came to regard the Friday the 13th as a bit. I always kind of regarded them as a sort of an amateur hour take on the Halloween series, which I always far preferred. Of course, not so much lately, but certainly in terms of the original 80s stuff and all of that stuff, I always far preferred the Halloweens to the Friday the 13th. Again, I have gotten somewhat fonder of them later. I don't mind the first one. I think the second one's actually pretty good. I always liked 6. I watched 3 last year and had a good time with it. I don't hate it hate the series by any stretch of the imagination. And again, I am probably slightly easier on it now than I was 10 years ago. But I've still never quite understood the absolute adulation that some horror fans have for it. It's just like, really? Okay. Number two, modern horror sucks. I'm sorry. I know I'm going to be called one of those old farts who had never moved on from the 80s, and that's probably true, but I just find so much of modern horror just so boring, especially the elevated horror stuff, which is basically just a code for not fun anymore. And I mean, that's why I got into horror, because it was fun. Now it's all artsy fartsy and boring. Now, again, there's the odd exception. I mean, last year I enjoyed a few. I thought Scream 6 was surprisingly good. I really liked Thanksgiving, which was a surprise because I can't say I've ever been a fan of Eli Roth. I remember seeing Cabin Fever in the 2000s, and I thought it was bloody awful, to be honest with you. I don't know if I've ever seen any of his others. I've never been inspired to see any of his others, and I've always thought he was thoroughly overrated. But I did really enjoy Thanksgiving. It's a good old-fashioned slasher throwback, and yes, please, more. The other one I enjoyed, which apparently half of horror fans hated, was It's a Wonderful Knife. Because again, just kind of like a old school late 90s teen slasher horror throwback. Again, more of that, please, and less of these boring ones that think they're intellectual. But there's the reasons why I dislike a lot of modern horror. It's the same reason I dislike a lot of modern movies in general, is the look of them. I guess it's the digital look, I don't know, but I just find it so boring and so colourless and so lacking in any kind of atmosphere. It's like, give me a 70s and 80s movie any day of the week, where just the visual aesthetics encourage atmosphere, and these days they just don't. Oh well, again, it's not. Again, I'm not. I'm not like. I don't take a hard line on everything. I mean, I didn't watch Hereditary for quite a few years because I'd already been put off by things like The Babadook that I thought were boring as fuck. And Hereditary, all the mainstream critics were orgasming, so I just assumed it was more of the boring same. And I saw that a couple of years ago. I was very impressed. I thought it was very good, shockingly enough. But generally speaking, the horror we get pumped out, and especially from Bumhouse these days, which are in the other direction to the artsy-fartsy ones, they're just stupid and crap and lazy. I don't know. A lot of it just tires me out these days. It's like, where's my 80s horror? Anyway, there you go. Modern horror sucks. Number 3. Oh, this Fright Night Part 2 is better than Fright Night. Oh, there's one to put the cat among the pigeons. Look, I used to love Fright Night. It was one of those movies it was one of the 2 movies, along with the original Elm Street, that just absolutely scared the living shit out of me when I was a kid. Again, I was not exposed to horror as a kid. I was watching tons of horror as a kid. Those 2 were like the only 2 that ever really freaked me out. I'm just not sure that the original really holds up that well. It takes an inordinate amount of time to get going as well. And I just like the second one more because it's pacier. It gets into it earlier. Roddy McDowall has got more to do. I love Roddy McDowall, especially as Peter Vincent. I think Tracy Lynn is just absolutely stunning and very much trading up on Marcy Darcy. And no offense to Chris Sarandon, but Julie Carmen works better for me as a sexy vampire than he does. No offense or anything. I'm sorry. I love Fright Night too. Saw it in the late 80s. I had it on VHS, like a one I got from like an essay video warehouse thing in the 90s. It was a really bad copy. And at some point it became completely unwatchable. And then it was a really long time before I ever got to see it again. And I saw it again in the mid-2010s. I've since picked up the Spanish Blu-ray, and I just think it's fucking wonderful. I think it's absolutely wonderful. I love Fright Night too. I think I prefer it to Fright Night. Sorry. Oh, this is another one. 4. Halloween 5. The Revenge of Michael Myers is better than any Halloween movie made in the 21st century. Now, I'm sorry. I know Halloween 5 gets a lot of stick, and don't get me wrong. I don't think it's in any way perfect. I saw Halloween 5 back to back with 4 back in the early mid 90s when I was just starting renting horror movies on my own. At the time, I loved them both kind of equally. Over the years, I can see, Halloween 4 is significantly better than Halloween 5. But I still kind of like Halloween 5. I think there's a lot to recommend in Halloween 5. From Donald Pleasance and Danielle Harris to some absolutely wonderful sequences. I think the sequences in when he's chasing her in the cornfield in the car, and the infamous what do you call it? Christ, I can't remember what they call it. The infamous laundry chute scene. Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. And I'm sorry, but I don't think there's been a Halloween movie made in the 21st century I even like. Resurrection was appalling and insulting to H2O. Rob Zombie's remakes, hate remakes, don't like Rob Zombie, fuck off. And the recent Bumhouse crap, oh my god, everybody was orgasming over the first one. They all admit the second two were shit. I didn't even watch the third one, I turned off the second one about halfway through. But 2018 was shite too, I'm sorry. It was very much Emperor's New Clothes stuff, where even today people can't admit, yeah, that wasn't a good movie, because it wasn't. I will take Halloween 5 over any of that shit. Any day of the week. 5. I'm one of those horror fans, and I'm one of those collectors that just doesn't get... I don't care about buying Rangers. I don't really care about 4K, and I don't care about matching spines and covers. This is more like an aesthetic opinion, and it's not limited to horror. I have a similar kind of bafflement with Doctor Who fans who get bent out of shape when like the logo on a range changes or the style changes. It's like, who cares? And again, I'm not gonna buy like all of the, what is it? Is it the 88 films? I'm not gonna buy all the slasher classics range. I'm gonna buy the ones that look good and interesting. I don't care about having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or the Scream Factories. I don't care about that. I don't give a shit. I want the movies in the best possible quality. Anything else is fucking irrelevant. Like 4K, I don't know. I can't afford it. Dude, it took me till 2014 to get a fucking Blu-ray player and a HD fucking TV. I ain't buying everything again. I'm sorry. I did get because it had a 4K Blu-ray. I did get like the 4K of Halloween 4. That's about the only one I have got one. That was partly because I was never happy with the Halloween 4 Blu-ray. For some reason, I don't know what it was, but for some reason the sound on that always felt really off. It seemed really muted. It was like this. It was like one of those where the soundtrack was loud but the dialogue was low, so you'd have to turn it fucking up to hear when people were talking, and then this music would come on. It'd be like, ah! I hate that shit, and that always wound me up. I actually went back to watching the DVD for a while instead of the Blu-ray because it's just so freaking annoying. And that's more or less why I picked up the 4K Blu-ray. And yeah, it looked beautiful. It was absolutely gorgeous. But again, I'm not sure I really see the need. I mean, I've got like a 40-inch TV. That's more than good enough for Blu-ray. I don't really have the room for any more than that. And I'm sorry, I've bought these fucking things on DVD most of the time, half the time. I've rebought them all on Blu-ray. I'm not rebuying them on fucking 4K. No. Go away. No. um, 6. This is more of an old school one. I actually prefer the 70s Hammer horror movies to the 60s ones. Now there's an awkward contrary opinion to you. For you. Again, I'm not saying this just to be bloody awkward. I kind of got into, I started getting into the Hammers a few years ago. The first one I saw was actually a 70s one, which was the Satanic Rites of Dracula, which is like the last one with Christopher Lee in. And it was on this multi-pack of 50 movies on DVD. Absolutely hideous quality. It was like full screen. It was clearly like a VHS rip, complete with crackles. Bloody terrible quality. But I sat and watched it one like Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So much so that eventually I went and got the Blu-ray, and I started getting into the others. And I have to be honest, the 70s ones, I really like the 70s ones. From Taste the Blood of Dracula to Scars of Dracula to AD 72, Satanic Rites, Legends of the Seven Golden Vampires, all the ones that all the Hammer purists hate, I really like. Not still vampires, but not Dracula. The Vampire Lovers, I really like the Vampire Lovers. Whereas of the 60s ones, the only one I was really moderately keen on would be Prince of Darkness, but I still kind of prefer the 70s ones. Oh dear. See, this is what I'm like as a Doctor Who fan. Again, I'm not being deliberately awkward. I just have different tastes. 7. Any remakes not made in the 1980s suck. I'm sorry, I hate remakes. I hate them with a homicidal passion. I hated the 2000s bloody craze of remaking fucking everything. I hate that they're still doing it now. Perhaps not to the same extent as they did, but I still hate it. I hate the fact that my favourite fucking movie, certainly my favourite horror movie, and possibly my favourite movie of all time, Black Christmas, has not one but fucking 2 completely bloody unnecessary in remakes. It just drives me up the walls. And whenever you say there's remakes suck, you're like, what about what about the Thing? What about the Blob? What about the Fly? It's like, yeah, those were made in the 80s, dude. The 80s were literally the best decade for everything, so of course they could do remakes. They can't even make original movies that don't suck half the time these days, let alone be remaking absolute classics in anything that other than rubbish. Sorry, rant over. But yeah, any remakes not made in the 80s suck. End of story. 8. Scream 4 is awesome. Scream 5 was shite. This is another thing I've seen that just in comments and stuff like that just drives me up the wall. The idea that Scream 4 was somehow bad, but then these same people will turn around and tell you that Scream 5 was good and a return to 4. But like, were you dropped on your head as a child? Like, I've said this before. I was quite happy leaving Scream as a trilogy. The first one was by far the best. It still is. But I was quite happy leaving it as a trilogy. And when they announced they were doing like Scream 4, like 11 years after the third one, I was like, really? Really? I had my doubts. And I didn't get to see it at the cinema because it didn't go to my local for some reason. And I think it got like mid-reviews, so I couldn't be asked to like traipse it to the city. So I waited to rent it. And I rented it, and I was freaking blown away by how great it was. I was like, wow, this was awesome. This is better than the other 2 sequels. And I still maintain that. Scream 5 came along, again, really long time, and there's no Craven or anything like that. I'm like, okay, I think it's a bad idea, but we'll give it a go, because, I felt the same with 4, and I loved that. 5 was bloody awful. Apart from the disgusting modern Hollywood trend of taking a legacy male hero and destroying them before murdering them, notice how it's the guy from the surviving trio that has to be taken down and destroyed. Yeah, no misandry there at all, as typical of modern Hollywood. But the whole thing's so boring. The opening scene is cool, and this movie was like the time I'd ever heard of Jenna Ortega, and I thought she was way better than anybody else in the movie, especially the modern cast. She was clearly the one with a kind of charisma and screen presence. The rest of them were boring as fuck. It's so boring. And you know what? I've said it already in this video. I liked Scream 6. I wasn't even going to see Scream 6. I went to see it because it was my birthday and I wanted to get out of the house and go to the pictures. And it was either that or, what was it? Bloody Ant-Man and Quantumania or whatever. It was like, I'm not going to see that. So I went into Scream 6 with absolutely no expectations whatsoever. Actually really enjoyed it. And you know what? After that, I went back to watch Scream 5 again, just to kind of, because I enjoyed 6 and give it another chance. And I still thought it was boring as fuck and shite. So, there. 9. The Blair Witch Project was garbage. I have to be honest, I am not a fan of found footage movies. I hate that genre. This is one of the reasons why the 2000s were just an awful time for me as a horror fan. Because the 3 consuming trends of the 2000s in horror were remakes, torture porn, which I don't like either, and freaking found footage movies. I think there's like one decent found footage movie, and that's Wreck. I saw Blair Witch Project at the cinema back in the day. I came out of it like, is that it? What the hell was that? I was bored for the majority of it. And I just came out of that movie like, what the fuck? And these days, it was a masterpiece. Oh, it was so good. No, it wasn't. It was a masterpiece of marketing, but as a movie, it was a pile of shite. I'm sorry, but it was. And number 10, if I haven't alienated everybody in the horror community already. Number 10 in my unpopular horror opinions, and I'm sure most of these opinions are shared by other people. It's just, again, a lot of what the consensus that I hear that just kind of grates my cheese. The post-Scream teen horror craze was awesome. I loved the post-Scream teen horror craze. Not just the teen horror craze, the teen comedy craze too. I think that was like the last time I was actually enjoying anything that Hollywood was putting out on a regular basis. After that, it was more like very much cherry-picking the occasional gem. This was like the last time that I was going to the cinema on a regular basis and more or less enjoying everything they put out. I love the post-Scream teen horror craze. The I Know What You Did Last Summer's, the Urban Legend, Final Destination, all that shit. I loved that stuff. That was so much fun. And you get these grumpy old horror fans. You've got your same you get working in the early 80s. Now I love the early 80s horror as well. I mean, the 80s are my favorite movie decade. They're my favorite horror movie decade. But dude, get the stick out of your belt for 5 minutes. The post-Scream teen horror craze was awesome. It was great bloody fun. Fun. Something, not a word you apply to movies most of the time these days. Yeah, so I loved that time. I was very disappointed when it came to an end. Obviously, it partly came to an end just because trends change, and partly because they pumped out some less than stellar ones as well. But you know what? One of the ones that I didn't think much of at the time, but which has got a real cult following and people like, was Cherry Falls with Michael Bain and Brittany Murphy. I rented that back in the day. I was like, eh. I haven't seen it for like 20 odd years, but people keep talking about it and saying it was great. And I watched it recently. I bought the DVD cheap, and I kind of enjoyed it. I still don't think it's a classic. I still don't think it's up there with some of the better ones of that era. But it's like next to half the stuff that comes out these days, that's actually pretty good fun. I'm down with that movie. I will watch it again. Easy. Anyway, those are 10 of my unpopular horror opinions. I hope to share more with you soon. Bye for now.